Jonas Reed was following the familiar trail to check his animal traps. Then he froze, catching a strange sound, a faint, choking moan, like the cry of a creature on the brink of death. Jonas moved closer. In the middle of the dry brush, caught in his rusted iron trap, was not an animal, but an Apache woman. She was tall, with a strong muscular build, but now, she was covered in blood. Her lower leg was clamped in the trap, and blood had soaked into the dirt beneath her. Her sun-darkened skin was coated in dust, and her long black hair clung to her sweat-drenched face. She looked up, and in her deep black eyes, fear and despair burned bright. As Jonas stepped forward, her trembling hand reached out, and her broken, raspy voice came through. "Please, help me. But I beg you, do not violate me. Do not lay me on a bed. That is forbidden for a woman who has been cast out, like me." In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Jonas stood still for a while. Then, his rough, calloused hand reached for the trap. The cold steel in his eyes softened just a little. With a sharp click, the trap snapped open. The woman collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Jonas lifted her up, her body heavy, trembling, and turned toward the direction of the cabin. The old wooden cabin sat nestled at the foot of the mountain, where Jonas Reed had lived in solitude for many years. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm golden glow across the smoke-darkened walls. On the rough bed covered with a wool blanket, Tayanita lay still, her leg wrapped loosely in clean cloth. The wound was still oozing blood. Her face was tense, and her deep black eyes never left Jonas. Every time he stepped closer, she flinched slightly, like a cornered animal. Jonas did not say much. He placed a bowl of water next to her, added a few slices of dry bread, then turned away, leaving her to decide for herself. He was used to silence. But this silence felt different, tight, suffocating, as if one spark could set it all ablaze. That evening, the wind howled through the wooden walls. Jonas sat by the fire, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the flames, though he was not really seeing them. Behind him, he heard a soft rustle. Tayanita was trying to sit up, reaching for a piece of bread. Her fingers were trembling, but she bit into it fiercely, like someone who had gone hungry for days. Jonas did not turn around. He simply nodded to himself. At sunrise, he led the horse out of the stall and prepared water for the cattle. Through a crack in the door, Tayanita watched, her eyes filled with both caution and curiosity. This man was nothing like the others she had met. No cages, no commands, just quiet living, and allowing her to exist in whatever space she needed. As evening fell, Jonas returned with an armful of firewood. Stepping into the cabin, he saw her fumbling with the stove. Her hands were large and strong, but clumsy. Smoke poured upward, stinging her eyes. She spun around, gaze sharp with challenge. "I do not need you." Jonas said nothing. He simply stepped forward, pulled out one stick, gently blew on the ember, and the fire sparked to life. Placing the stick back, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, stunned. That night, while the wind screamed outside in bursts, three things coexisted within the small cabin: fear, caution, and the faintest seed of trust. Jonas lay on the long bench, eyes staring at the ceiling, listening to the uneven sound of Tayanita's breathing behind him. And for the first time in many years, the cabin was no longer completely empty. In the days that followed, the small cabin slowly took on a different rhythm. Tayanita, though still cautious, had started getting out of bed, hobbling around the room. Her bandaged leg caused her pain, but her eyes still burned bright, never willing to show weakness. At first, she simply sat in silence in a corner, watching Jonas work. He sawed wood, hauled water, fed the cattle, all with the calm efficiency of a man used to living alone. But Tayanita's eyes, though she tried to hide it, followed his every move. One morning, as Jonas was tidying up the kitchen area, he was surprised to find the pot already filled with water and ready to boil. On the table, a few pieces of firewood had been stacked clumsily, but neatly. She said nothing, turning her face away, as if denying the small effort. Jonas said nothing either, just gave a slight nod, then went back to work. On the third day, he saw her trying to lift the axe to split wood. Her arms were strong, but her movements were awkward. The blade struck at an angle, sending a chunk of wood flying, nearly hitting her foot. Jonas rushed over and grabbed the axe handle. Their eyes locked his, cold gray. Hers, deep and dark. The tension was thick, almost explosive. But then he simply pushed her hands back gently and set the axe down. You do not need to push yourself before you have healed. Jonas's voice was low, firm. Tyanita pressed her lips together, pride burning in her gaze. But that evening, he noticed the firewood had been stacked more neatly than before. Little by little, the distance between them began to shrink. They still spoke little, but the silence was no longer heavy. Shared meals became more familiar. Tyanita ate slowly, and once, when she looked up, she caught Jonas quietly sliding an extra piece of meat onto her plate. She looked surprised for a moment, then turned away, hiding a faint, uncertain smile. Another time, when Jonas was outside repairing the fence, a strong gust of wind blew the window open. Tyanita limped over and struggled to close it. Her rough hand pressed against the wooden frame, holding it shut until Jonas returned. When he stepped inside, her forehead was damp with sweat, but her eyes dared him. "I am not weak." Jonas looked at her longer than usual. He said nothing, simply took her calloused hand away from the window and handed her a dry cloth. And for the first time, Tyanita did not pull back. Day by day, the cabin that once held only the presence of a solitary man now carried another breath, rough, proud, but very much alive. Neither of them had said it out loud, but both had taken the first steps on the path toward trust. One rainy night, the wind howled down from the mountains, lashing against the tin roof of the cabin with long, mournful wails. In the fireplace, the flames crackled softly, casting a warm orange glow on the wooden walls scarred with old bullet marks. Jonas sat by the window. A dusty banjo rested quietly at his feet. His eyes stared out into the black curtain of rain. Across the room, on the bed, Tyanita lay silent, her dark eyes wide open, unable to sleep. The sound of the rain stirred something in both of them, memories they would rather forget. Jonas spoke, his voice rough, like wind moving through stone. "I once had a family, a wife, and a son who never got the chance to be born. One winter, a plague swept through. I watched them go, all of them. And since then, it has been just me and this house." He paused. His hand trembled slightly as he held his cigarette. In that silence, Tyanita turned toward him, her gaze fixed. The firelight softened her weathered face, making her eyes seem even deeper. After a long moment, she whispered, her voice breaking like dry twigs, "I lost everything too. They called me a curse. Because for years I could not bear children. They saw me as a burden, a reason for the tribe's decline. My husband abandoned me. Even my own blood cast me out." As the words left her, Tyanita's broad shoulders trembled. Years of pride, years of hardened wounds, cracked open like shattered glass. Jonas did not come closer. He did not offer comfort. He simply nodded, eyes of cold steel fixed on the fire. Two people, a rancher who lost his family, and an Apache woman cast away, sat in opposite corners of the cabin, yet shared the same abyss inside their souls. That silence was no longer heavy. It had become a thread thin, invisible, that drew two broken hearts closer together. Outside, the rain still poured against the cabin walls. But inside, for the first time in many years, two people no longer felt entirely alone. Thank you for being here. If this story brought back old memories, dusty afternoons, the sound of hooves echoing deep in your heart, then subscribe to my channel, so that each day we can sit together again. And I will tell you another story from the Wild West. Winter was slowly retreating from the mountains, but the nights remained cold as steel. Even with the doors shut tight, the wooden cabin shuddered with each gust of wind. Jonas sat in front of the fireplace, his calloused hands carving a rough spoon out of a piece of wood. His eyes, however, were not truly focused on the task. They kept drifting toward the woman sitting in the far corner. Tyanita, wrapped in a worn wool blanket, was patiently stitching up a torn shirt with an old thread. The night was quiet. Only the crackling of the fire filled the space. Then, without a word, Jonas stood up and reached for the thickest coat hanging by the door. He walked over and gently draped it across Tyanita's broad shoulders. She flinched, her dark eyes locking onto his, alert and a little confused. Jonas spoke softly, his voice rough but warm. "It is cold." Tyanita did not reply, but her hand, still holding the needle, trembled slightly as if holding back something she could not name. From that moment on, The small gestures began to grow. At meals, Jonas always pushed the meat toward her side of the plate. When she tried to carry water from the well, Jonas followed silently behind, keeping hold of the rope to steady the bucket. No words were exchanged, but those quiet acts of care slowly began to wear down the thorns around their hearts. One evening, after a long day repairing the fence, they sat together on the porch. The highland wind blew past, carrying the scent of dry grass and cooking smoke. Jonas poured her half a glass of corn whiskey and offered it. Tyanita hesitated, then took it and sipped. The sting of the liquor made her full lips tremble slightly. Their eyes met longer than usual. In the glow of the firewood, Jonas saw something in her gaze that was no longer just fear or pride. There was another light now. Faint, but impossible to look away from. Without saying a word, he reached out and touched her rough hand. Calluses met calluses. Tyanita did not pull away. In that moment, it felt like the final thread had snapped free. Jonas leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, hesitant at first, then firmer, as if trying to make up for all the lonely years and all that had been lost. Tyanita trembled. Her strong shoulders leaned into him, and in that embrace, two broken souls finally found something to hold on to. That night, the cabin did not echo only with wind and fire. It held the sound of breath shared between two people who had dared to step out of the dark and into the light. Rumors spread like wildfire across the dry prairie. In town, whispers stirred about an Apache woman cast out now hiding at Jonas Reed's ranch. Some laughed. Others began calculating how much she might fetch if handed over to the nearest trafficking post. And among them, one bounty hunter quietly accepted the job. His name was Clay Murdoch, tall and lean, with skin weathered like rusted iron and eyes sharp as a blade. He had made his living tracking down the broken and the damned. Now, he had set his sights on this woman, determined to collect a handsome reward. One late afternoon, with red sunlight spilling across the open plains, Jonas was leading a horse into the stable when he heard hoofbeats in the distance. The clink of metal on saddle rang out like a funeral bell. Jonas slowly released the reins and rested a hand on the rifle at his side. Tyanita stepped onto the porch, her sun-darkened face held high, black eyes blazing in the fading light. She had lived a life under scorn, but this time, she knew real danger had come calling. Clay Murdoch reined in his horse at the wooden gate. His voice was dry and coarse. "I heard you are keeping an Apache woman. That woman is worth something. Hand her over, and I will walk away." Jonas stood tall, his shoulders heavy like the mountain at his back. He answered flatly, "She is not a thing to be traded." Clay smirked, waving a crumpled warrant in the wind. "Then you are standing against the law, and I like fools like you stubborn to the end." The wind swept through the tall grass, lifting dust across the open yard. The air grew thick, almost suffocating. Jonas took a quiet step back, giving Tyanita a slight nod, as if to tell her to go inside. But she did not move. She gripped the small axe in her hand, her eyes burning like fire. The sky turned to deep indigo. Darkness was falling, and with it, a confrontation that could no longer be avoided. Jonas knew well. Blood would be spilled. He turned to Tyanita, his voice low but firm. "No matter what happens, I will not let him take you." And out front, Clay Murdoch tightened his grip on the gun at his hip, his eyes like a predator ready to strike. A deadly clash was drawing near. Jonas stood firm at the cabin door, his grip tight on the Winchester rifle, while inside, Tyanita trembled. The nightmare she had long feared had become real. 3 bounty hunters had tracked them down, torches in hand, eyes glowing with menace. "Hand over the Apache woman, old rancher, and you might live." The voice of the leader was thick and gravelly, as if he already counted himself the victor. Jonas spat on the ground, raising his rifle level with his eyes. "Take one more step, and one of you will fall." The air was thick and charged. One pull of the trigger, and blood would splash across the cabin porch. But just as the tension reached its peak, a low horn blew from the edge of the valley. Then shadows emerged, riders cloaked in animal hides, spears glinting in the firelight, Apache warriors. The bounty hunters spun around in shock, but before they could react, arrows sliced through the air, pinning their torches to the ground and snuffing out the flames. The prairie was swallowed in darkness, save for the pounding of hooves closing in all around. A tall Apache elder rode forward, his voice echoing clear and strong. "You hunt the weak, sell their bodies like beasts. This sin will not go unpunished by the tribe." The bounty hunters, now pale and trembling, were struck down and bound by the warriors. The scene felt like judgment passed by the land itself, undeniable, final. Tyanita stepped out of the cabin, her face lit by the flickering fire. The very warriors who once turned their backs on her now bowed their heads. The elder's voice turned rough, heavy with meaning. "We were wrong to cast you aside. You are of our blood. From this day on, if you choose to stay with this man, that will be your choice. But know this, we have come to make amends." Tears welled in Tyanita's eyes. She turned to Jonas, and her strong hand reached for his hand, the one that had dared to stand against the world for her. Jonas gave a quiet nod, a weight lifting from his heart. He was no longer alone in this fight, and more importantly, Tyanita was no longer a castaway. She had been claimed by love, by choice, and by her people. That night, under a sky full of stars, no blood had to be shed, but the hearts of two people and an entire tribe were mended through choice, through love, and through forgiveness. The next morning, sunlight stretched across the prairie, still heavy with the mist of night. Jonas's small wooden cabin, once a symbol of solitude, now glowed with life, the sound of horses neighing and the voices of Apache men and women filling the air outside. The tribe had stayed through the night, both as protectors and as a sign of goodwill. Jonas sat on the porch steps, his Winchester resting by his side, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Tyanita stepped outside, her sun-darkened face lit by something he had never seen before, peace. She quietly sat down beside him, her strong but gentle hand resting on his. The elder approached and bowed his head to them both. "We owe you, Jonas, and we owe Tyanita. The tribe was blind. We let our daughter suffer, scorned and abandoned. But you have shown that compassion is stronger than fear. From this day forward, the doors of our tribe will always be open to you." Jonas answered with a quiet nod. He had no need for grand words. What mattered was that Tyanita was no longer cast out, and he was no longer alone. As the tribe departed, Tyanita stood watching for a long while, then turned to Jonas and whispered, I think I am with child." Jonas froze. His hand reached for her belly, trembling, as if not daring to believe the words he had just heard. A smile spread across his face, a face once carved by hardship and loss. In his eyes now shone a glimmer of hope, a light stronger than all the years of darkness behind them. In the days that followed, they began to rebuild the cabin together. Jonas added a small room off the side of the house, sometimes pausing to imagine the sound of little feet running across the wooden porch. Tyanita sat by the window, sewing small pieces of cloth into tiny shirts, her eyes filled with quiet joy. As the evening sun painted the prairie in fiery red, Jonas sat on the porch, his arm wrapped around Tyanita's shoulders. Her hand rested gently over her belly, where a new life was beginning to grow. The wind carried the scent of dry grass, wood smoke, and the quiet promise of a better tomorrow. Jonas spoke softly, his voice low and warm. "Maybe God let us lose our way, just so we could find each other." Tyanita leaned her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. In that moment, they both knew, though the world outside remained harsh, they had a home, a family, and a faith that nothing could shake. Out on the prairie, where once there was only dust and loneliness, a new story had taken root, one of love, forgiveness, and a family born from pain. Dear friends, in the desert of life, love is the rare drop of water that nourishes the soul. It does not erase every scar, but it makes us strong enough to keep walking. A man can survive by fire and steel, but he only truly lives when he finds a hand to hold and a home to return to. In the end, I wish you a life full of joy and happiness. I love you, my dear audience of Wild West storytelling. Tell me what you thought about this story. Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed it. And do not forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories from the Wild West.